Jonathan Wiseman here, and we are doing another episode of The Grit. With me today, my guest, good friend of mine, many years, Jason Wright. How you doing today, Jason?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm glad to have you here. Your show, this show today is actually going to be a little bit interesting, a little bit different, because you have your story of getting into business is a little different than most, and I love it, and I can't wait to share that with everybody. And you've already exited out of some of your businesses and ventures. So we're going to get into those stories, learn a little bit about that. Brought your lovely wife with you. Hi, Holly. How are you?
I'm good.
All right. Thanks for coming. Thanks for hanging out. The rest of the audience, y'all aren't going to get to see her anymore. But that was her little intro. Actually, if you tune in next week, you will get to meet Holly because she's going to have her own show on here. And really looking forward to that. That's going to be some cool shit. So let's get right into it, Jay. First, tell me the name of the business that we're going to talk about. Tell me what type of business it was, and then we'll get into how you started.
Yeah, and before we jump into that, I certainly want to acknowledge the efforts that you're making, not only with the podcast, but with this digital marketing ad agency that you've built. You know, not only am I proud, of what you've built here.
I appreciate that.
I'm really excited for what you're doing for the business community, for entrepreneurs out there, because you and I both know business owners, entrepreneurs, they start a business based around a product or a service that they have some experience around typically, but they don't necessarily know squat about sales and marketing, about customer service, about operations. And so this new era of podcasting combined with digital ad, SEO, Google ads, and just kind of that overall thought leadership mentality, people don't know about it. I've been speaking about this for probably 5 or 6 years now, doing keynote sessions within the industry, different conferences and things like that. And I've been trying to get the word out about position yourself as a thought leader. Do things like this. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, I was doing a keynote in Denver at a conference. CRN, the channel company, put on great tech conferences all around the world, and I was doing a session. I actually was filling in for a guy who had to back out, and so we were talking about this. We were talking about thought leadership and specifically about podcast marketing. And when we got the feedback from the show, because they rate every show, you want to get top 2 box scores. You know, 7 being the best. You want 6s and 7s. All the feedback was loved all the talk about podcast marketing, want to hear more, want you guys to build more of that content in your upcoming session. So kudos to you, man.
Thank you,
brother. Good job on what you're doing.
And it's great to get that feedback. This is such a new industry, and I've done the research for the last year and a half now. We're the first company in the world to offer really podcasting as a marketing service. Okay. Not saying that people don't do them, they don't add the video or the audibles, and that they market themselves with it, but nobody's actually taken the concept and taken the meat of it, the assets, broken them down and using those to market the business. So it's great being a leader in that, but the difficult part and sometimes the scary part is not having anything to gauge your success on. Yeah. Your success or your failures, to know how you're doing. So having that feedback really means a lot, and I appreciate you brought that today.
Yeah, no problem. And, and that's what I keep telling my wife. She's, out there promoting her books and her ministry, trying to grow her ministry. And I've been telling her for months, I'm like, Johnny's got the answer. You got to get with him. You got to create a podcast. This is how you're going to get the message out about your ministry, about the books, and all those things. So anyway, it's great. I'm a big fan, so I'm glad to be here. So our business, you mentioned it was a little kind of atypical route into entrepreneurship, certainly an unorthodox path. So the company was called Texas Group. It was started back in 2004 as what they refer to as a managed services provider. So basically, we're a company that is an outsourced IT option for small to mid-sized businesses. So companies of all shapes and sizes that don't really want or have the skill sets necessary to handle their IT, all the things related to their marketing and networking, managing their servers, help desk type services. And then when you think about all the new and disruptive technologies in the industry now, like cloud computing, AI, IoT, all these different things. It's such a complex world. There's so many facets, so many tools, applications related to managing IT.
Sure.
And so,
do you see the industry changing from what it used to be? You know, when I think IT, and there's so many different areas to dive into that niche as a business model. But when I think a lot of people think of IT, they just think of Ethernet cables and getting your computer to work and get on the internet.
yeah.
You know, and now with, and before, big companies would have their own server rooms dedicated for their whole entire company. Have you seen that change over the last few years with cloud computing, cloud servers, or are people with big infrastructures still utilizing the same technologies that they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, some of the same technology and same methodologies are still being used, but the disruption the change of pace is unprecedented, right? So you said cloud computing, right? That's changed the whole paradigm on how businesses operate and how they go to market, right? So a couple years ago, used to be you'd go out and buy servers and buy networking equipment and buy computers and all those type of things, and that's how you ran and operated your business.
Sure.
But much of that now has shifted to a cloud computing or an off-premise model, such as, it's the same as like Blockbuster, right? Blockbuster, we all know, is no longer in business, right?
Yeah.
So pretty interesting story there, but used to be you'd go to the video store, you'd drive up there, you'd walk around the store for 2, 3, 5, 10 minutes. You'd pick out your
Sometimes
videos.
2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, and you'd come home, and then you'd end up not taking them back on time. And you'd have all the late fees, and then your wife would be griping at you didn't take the movies back. So
Yeah. We could have just bought it.
could have just bought it. So along comes Netflix, which coincidentally, the owner of Netflix, went to Blockbuster initially with the idea of streaming video. And Blockbuster's like, are you crazy? All my stores are so profitable. Why would I sink any money into this? He blew them off. So the guy goes out, starts Netflix. And as we all know here, it's been one of the hottest stocks in the market for a long time. And so that's one of the many shifts that we've seen in IT over the years is customers don't have to feel held down by the big box vendors spending huge capital expenditures to buy this equipment. They got to carry it on their books, amortize it. It's a heavy expense, heavy burden, shows debt on their books. And so at the end of the day, it's moved to more of a shared risk model, right? Now, just like you plug in to the wall outlet to get your electricity, companies plug into the cloud. They get all their data and compute power from the cloud. They pay a monthly fee.
And nowadays you're allowed to pay for what you're actually using.
And you pay, and it's a pay-as-you-go, pay-as-you-grow.
Yeah.
Right? So it's very efficient that way, and allows businesses to be much more operationally efficient. And
Yeah, it seems like a much more efficient model.
Well, you can scale so fast, right?
Yeah.
You know, when you start your business, you're very careful about your expenses. The last thing you want to do is go out and spend it on a bunch of equipment that's not, directly tied to revenue, right? It's just
equipment and bandwidth you're not using yet.
Yeah. So that's what that's what the business was founded on, and back in the early 2000s, even the late 90s, you had a lot of IT service providers. We call them, 3 guys in a truck. And what they did was when something broke in your office, you called these guys and they gave you a rate. They said, yeah, I'll come out for $150 an hour.
Yep.
You didn't know how long it would take them to fix. You didn't know ultimately what the expenditure was going to be.
You didn't have any options.
You didn't have any options. You didn't know how long you'd be down, right? You had
Yep.
no control over the situation. And so we were really one of the pioneering companies bringing this managed services idea to the market. And the original founders who started the company actually came from an enterprise background. They were both executives at Schlumberger in Schlumberger's global IT outsourcing group. They owned a company called SEMA. So they weren't just oil and gas then, they were IT back then too. And the idea was we're going to bring this enterprise support model, which is remote healing, remote support, automation, call into a service desk, we'll resolve it remotely, that kind of service. But they packaged it and priced it, so it could be affordable for
Sure.
small to medium businesses. So that's how Texas Group got its start. 2004, had hyper growth first couple of years, and then a couple of things happened. First, we had the financial crisis, right? So
Sure.
that really clamped down on a lot of budgets. A lot of businesses went out of business, right? So you lost contracts and so forth. Then the CEO who started the company, my other two partners were older, so he had some health issues. He had been doing the sales. He couldn't run and gun anymore. He'd been in the hospital for a couple of months. So they essentially went out to people in their network, and they said, look, we need a young, smart person who can come in and not only drive sales for us, but really build a sales program for us. And because me personally, I'd already had a background in technology sales. I'd been very successful at a few other companies. I was young. I was well networked, so people knew me in the marketplace.
Were you working with the company yet at this time?
No, I wasn't working with a company. And, I wanted to start my own business. And this is kind of an interest. This is kind of what leads to the idea of how
So we know where you're about to go with this, with that part of the story, and then bringing you on. What were you doing at this time for business?
So I was working at a technology company. I had been working at a company selling big corporate phone systems, big PBX systems, voicemails, call centers, IVRs, the systems you call and punch buttons. And it doesn't sound exciting, but they were very expensive systems. They were highly complex. And so I had been doing that for 2 or 3 companies over the previous 8 or 10 years.
And it falls in line with IT.
Falls in line with IT.
Yeah.
And at the time, I tell people all the time now, when I give advice, I'm like, one thing is, if you have any inkling you want to start a business, start it when you're young. The thing about us was we started a family very young. As you know, we were parents at a very young age, early 20s. Along with being parents comes debt. And then my wife had a great career in advertising, made a lot of money, really good job. But she had a passion to be in ministry, to grow her relationship with Christ, and to really help other people grow their relationship with Christ. And so we made a very difficult sacrifice for her to stay home, be with the kids, and build the ministry. And so because of those things, I wasn't in a position where I could do what Johnny's done many times over and starve a year or two while you build a business. So these guys were looking for the sales guy, the guy who come in and build the program. A mutual friend of ours who's the CEO of another very successful high-growth services company in the HR space, they said, you're looking for a sales guy, you got to talk to Jason Wright. He's your guy. He's well networked. He's aggressive. He's really good, and he's specifically skilled in hyper growth, fast track growth. He'll bring you business right out of the gate. So that's how I got to Texas. And so when we came to the table to talk about the opportunity and ultimately compensation, there was an opportunity for equity right out of the gate, and it would vest over a period of time.
That's nice. That doesn't happen often.
Not really, no. But I think, really smart entrepreneurs
absolutely
will look at key individuals, key personnel within their organization, guys and gals that they can't afford to lose, and a lot of times
give them equity.
They'll give them some equity.
Well, and I'm seeing it a lot, or hearing about it as well, a lot more nowadays than they used to 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago is kind of unheard of,
right.
Unless you were
exactly
begging for it.
Yeah.
And most time you didn't get it. And these days now, you're seeing it a lot more.
Yep.
And it's nice because it keeps your people loyal, it keeps them engaged, and keeps them doing what they need to do. And they've got equity in it, so they're going to bust their ass to make it happen.
That's exactly right. And that's ultimately what happened. The way we structured it was I would get a certain percentage, again, that would vest over time. Of course, I negotiated a lesser vesting period than they had proposed. But then I said, hey, guys, why don't we put some growth in there? Why don't we put some accelerators in it based on production, right? So, for instance, for every $1 million we grow the business in top line, you give me an additional point or 1.5 in equity. And they thought, man, that sounds good. I mean, it's based on growth. Why not? You benefit, we benefit, everyone makes out. And so that's how it was set up. I don't think they ever intended that we would grow to the point where I would max it out, because they did put a cap on it.
What was that cap at?
The cap was at 8%.
Okay.
So they gave me 3 out of the gate. Then the accelerators would build to 8% if I could hit those targets.
And they never thought you'd hit them.
Not only that, not only did we hit them, but then they came back to me, about a year and a half before, and gave me a bunch more equity because they thought, look, we you're a valuable part of the company, the institution, and we want to keep you tied in
That's really nice.
for as long. So
I was going to say it was either that or try to buy you out and liquidate you.
yeah, well, they were smart on that front. So they structured it in a way that if I were to leave, they could buy the shares back at book value, not at market value.
Wow.
So when you're a small business owner, you take all the money out of the business anyways
Sure.
to avoid the
course.
heavy corporate tax. So book value is wouldn't have been. They would have bought it back for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah,
so they had me.
That's what
They
you
were
call
smart.
strategy.
That's strategy, yeah. So that's how I got into the business. That's how I became an owner, and that was the beginning of a very productive and fruitful relationship. And I remain very, very close to these partners again. We all have non-competes related to the exit and so forth. But if an opportunity presents itself again down the line, we'll definitely take a look at it.
So are you currently in a non-compete with that type of business with the guys that the whatever group bought the company?
Yeah. There's a couple different elements to the non-compete I'm in now. So when we sold the company about 4.5 years ago, we had a 2-year non-compete, which we all stayed on. Then they essentially exited the business.
Well, let's go ahead and back up a
Yeah.
little bit. So how long were you with the company before the acquisition?
So let's see, that was around 2008. In fact, somebody just told me next week is my 10-year anniversary. We sold, 4.5 years ago. So I was there about 6 years.
Okay. And then so you were there 6 years, grew the company, scaled it, and then sold, capped out on your max at your 8%.
Yeah.
And then after you sold the acquisition, did you stay on the team?
Yes.
And so obviously there was some type of
I'm still there
contract
now.
there. Okay. So
I'm
you're
still
there
at the
now.
company now. Yeah.
Okay.
So I stayed on.
Well, congratulations on your 10 years.
Yeah.
That's
Appreciate it.
They give you a Rolex or what?
Yeah. Those days are gone. They just gave me more work to do.
Yeah, they don't do that shit anymore,
No.
do they?
No.
They're like, you can buy your own.
That's it. But they, post sale, I was immediately branded or promoted to sales manager. I mean, I was our VP of sales in the previous company.
Okay.
I became what they called a territory sales manager for a year. And then they were essentially just grooming me to be the managing director. So I was going to run the P&L for all the South Texas offices. So Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, Corpus. So then I became the managing director. I did that job for a couple of years. So I essentially had the P&L responsibility for the whole branch. So like a GM, right?
I mean, how cool is that, though? And for you, too, to go from starting a sales gig, getting put with the company, you grow the company, you scale, you cap out, you cash out because it sells, and then they bring you back on and put you in basically a GM position to run it, still paying you a salary.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the dream.
Well, and that's really the model of the company I work for now, which is all covered. They're a wholly owned subsidiary of Konica Minolta, which is a huge global technology, Japanese technology conglomerate. And so that's the model, right? So the acquisition strategy by All Covered was essentially we're going to go out and we're going to find the best IT companies across America and initially build a nationwide footprint, right? Field engineering, offices, and that's what the acquisition strategy was initially.
So that's what they did. They were just going and buying them all up.
Yeah, they were buying customer base and they were buying, market share and making sure we had brick and mortar offices all across
the globe. Gotcha.
And then ultimately, once we had offices across the country, then the strategy shifted to more strategic buys, so value-added services. Some of these next-gen technologies and offerings that are some of the disruptive technologies I mentioned. And so initially it was about let's build scale and then let's add value, to our clients and to our portfolio. And that's really where we're at today. I think they've made roughly 35 acquisitions. I think we were number 24 or something of that nature. And the point is that they would come in and it wasn't like a PE play where sometimes they'll come in and lean it out, because they
Sure.
they lever the company up with debt to acquire it. So then they gotta cut
Liquidate it.
They gotta cut fat. They
Yeah.
gotta cut costs so that they can get it profitable again. And but that's not what the play was here. So they not only look for the talent in there, but they look to provide them upward mobility, a path to be promoted, and so forth. And so I'm not even the MD anymore. So I did that for a couple of years. And the funny thing is I would say, and others in the company would say, it's the hardest position I think in the company. And to me, the effort wasn't commensurate with a salary in that role. And Mama kept looking at my paychecks, and she's like, these aren't as big as when you're at Texas. And so eventually she kicked me in the pants and said, get back to sales. So we had a new group. It was, enterprise sales.
So you went ahead and jumped back. And I see that in many different business models where people jump back to sales positions because you have the opportunity to make more money. If you've got the grit and the grind, you get out there, you hustle, you do your thing, you can bring in whatever amount of money you need to make.
That's right. And again, that's, I love being in leadership. I especially love the strategy around it.
And you do that naturally. And your wife does too.
Yeah. But my heart is really in client engagement, dealing with customers, being face-to-face with customers, and I'm really good at that element of it. And so we, as the company was growing, it was all about, look, we're a big company now. Let's start going after larger enterprise clients. And so they created this very small select team to go out and sell enterprise accounts. And we had some turnover there because it's really hard to sell large accounts. It's hard enough selling a service, right?
Yeah.
If it's because you're essentially selling human capital. You have to be good at differentiating yourself. If you don't have a product or a widget, that's features and benefits, bells and whistles, it really becomes hard. So
you're the commodity.
That's right. I'm the commodity.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about relationships. And that's what I like also nowadays. And I'm maybe it's because I'm getting older, I'm not sure, but it's you do business with people that you like.
That's right. That
you get along with, that you can kick it with, that you can see yourself with your families hanging out. It's not it's not anymore about, shiny ball syndrome or flashy disco balls and buying whatever you think looks cool or sounds cool, or nobody's going to, put a stick on you or pull the wool over your eyes, or it's really about relationship building now, especially once you start getting, above a 6-figure deal, it's all relationship. You are the commodity. You're what sells.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have the right people in place that are ready for that or can produce, I can see why there's a little bit of turnover there.
Yeah, and going back to Texas, and this is really a big part of the story. So I get there. I think at the time I'm 28 years old. They hire another guy at the same day they hired me, and it was basically a race to the top in terms of sales. And even though they knew I would likely be the sales leader, they created a little friendly competition. And I'm friends with the guy who they hired at the same time. He ended up working for me, and he's gone on to a very successful career in technology sales himself. He works at some big companies. But, what I did was I focused, those first 3, 6, 9 months, and this is really what I was good at just generating activity, generating a funnel, building a funnel, generating sales. And so they were very quick to realize, okay, this guy at least knows how to sell, right? And I'm learning the industry. It was a little bit of a different industry. So I'm learning the industry, but as I'm out there selling, I'm sitting across from customers, and I'm starting to hear the same repetitive things. What had happened, right, is other companies saw how successful we were, and they just started copying our model.
Sure, always.
Right?
When you're at the top,
we're doing what you do,
absolutely, right? All day long.
So I'm going in and meeting with people, and I don't sound any different than the guy before or after me, right? And it was very hard to differentiate. I'm saying one thing, and they're like, well, the other guys say they do the same thing, so what else, right?
So how do you differentiate yourself?
That's exactly right. So I spent that first year just putting sales on the books. I'll never forget Dark Tan. The tanning salon company was my very first client, and a very loyal client, and they remain a client of the company, 10 years later. But we were sitting in a Schlotzsky's, and they were looking. So they had some outages with their equipment, went down. The money is really tied up in their salons and the tanning beds, right? So they needed a good disaster recovery strategy. So we moved them to the cloud. And back then, cloud was still in its infancy. A lot of people didn't know about it. They didn't know what it was. And so we're sitting in Schlotzsky's, and I give him a proposal, and Robbie, the owner, he's looking at it, and he's like, man, this seems like a lot of money. And I said, well, hang tight, and I pull a napkin over, just like something you might see on the movies, and I start scribbling some things down, and I'm like, we start doing ROI modeling, ROI metrics, okay, what does your average salon make? Okay, so then you could kind of back into what it's not making when it's down, when they can't process transactions.
Sure.
Then I'm like, well, how much the last time you bought all your IT equipment, how much was that? How much was the maintenance on it, the software renewals, right? How much was even the power you have to pay every month?
You reverse engineer the overhead and show him where he's going to save.
And by the time we got to the bottom of the napkin, he goes, okay, I get it. Where do we, let's get started.
Yeah, where do I sign?
But that was something that just came instinctively to me. I didn't necessarily think about that, but then I dialed into something. I'm like, this is how you have to sell these type of services, recurring revenue services, selling human capital. You have to be able to justify the cost, and you got to be able to look at ROI in terms of immediate ROI, not 4 or 5 years down the road.
Yeah, well, and I see that these days as well as people. They're not as patient as they used to be when it comes to ROI, and the different means to invest into growth and scaling. They need to see it quick, otherwise they don't consider it a win.
That's right.
So
yeah, so that first year was all exploratory for me, and
it seems like you were able to separate yourself from the other guys that were doing it, though.
Well, this is the best part of the story, I think. So what we did was I eventually went to my other partners and I said, guys, look, we got to spend some money. I mean, their traditional way of selling was going into a client, opening up their laptop and running through 50 slides about me, what do we do, how do we do it, right? And old marketing sheets, like leaving behind one-pagers.
Yeah,
and
people don't want to see that shit anymore.
Yeah, and it just wasn't my way of selling, right? So I put together this plan to rebrand the company, to bring us into the next generation in terms of marketing, which meant automating a lot. People don't realize, like, you can automate so much of your marketing and take that burden off of you, right? And that's where they turn to guys like you. I did the exact same thing. You weren't in this business then, or I would have hired you back then. But the point was, it was going to be a very expensive proposition.
Sure.
I remember it was around $140,000 that I wanted to spend to build out our whole new web, mobile presence, all of our demand generation, rebrand the company as far as look, feel, color, taglines. And then one of the best things I did was we created a playbook, which was going to be based on how do we differentiate, and then it would be a tool for the sales team to be able to go in and sit in front of a client and be able to say, here's how we do business and here's why you're going to do business with me. And the funny thing is at the time the business was, it was only a couple of million. $140,000 on marketing is insane. Very few people are going to spend money on it. So I use this concept of power of tens. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
Yeah.
So the idea was, instead of, when you go into a lot of marketing companies, and I hear you talk about this all the time, it's, again, back to the thought leadership. The first thing they're gonna ask you is, well, what's your marketing budget? How much are you spending on ads? What keywords are you searching for? It's all tactical stuff. It's not strategic. And I went through probably 10 or 12 different marketing companies, Google ad companies, PR firms, different types of ad agencies, until I finally found one. And I'll give my friend and colleague and mentor in some ways a plug.
Please do.
Jonathan with Brand Extract. He was the guy that we ultimately hired. They're more of a strategy firm around marketing. But the idea was, instead of just going in and say, hey, I want to grow my business 25% or 30%, or just saying I'm going to grow sales by a factor of adding headcount, right, which we all know doesn't work. Instead, we kind of went on this journey together to look at the business, all across the business, across customer service, marketing, sales, operations, and figure out where can we make incremental changes, small incremental changes, easy to enact, that when you collectively bring them all together, you got 40% growth, 50% growth. So we started looking at ways we could improve operational efficiency, right? Ways we could deliver services and it would reduce our cost by 10%. And then we looked at ways that we could upsell additional services into existing customers, and that would grow revenue by 10%. And then net new customers through marketing, 10%, right? You start adding all this up, and before you know it, I was telling the partners, I said, listen, I think we can grow as much as 40% with this plan, and you'll have your money back in 9 months, but let's be conservative. I'll say 25%. And they bought into it. They bought into me. And that later that year, we were one of the winners of the Houston Fast 100 companies, and I'm holding the trophy because we grew 44% that year. So
that's cool.
And a lot of that's God's blessings. It's faith. Some of it's luck. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I was a genius.
Sure.
But instinctively, I'm in front of clients. I'm feeling something. I'm hearing something. And I'm feeling we got to go a different direction. I trusted my.
You also had a broad enough idea, though, that it was going to be a little bit of everything that you compound together to make that happen. Mm-hmm. A lot of my clients, when I ask them to see their P&Ls, that I want to look at their books, they look at me like I'm crazy. And you can easily look at a P&L statement or the books to see where the funds are going. Like you're saying, you can say 5% here, 3%, 2% here. It all does add up. But when it comes to marketing strategies, advertising, ROI, cutting overhead, whatever you can, a lot of that plays into the marketing strategies because it might make more sense to get rid of a certain employee or staff that's not producing for you, and then you implement a standardized or automation, as you were saying earlier, to replace that's going to give you guaranteed ROI versus just paying somebody to sit there and, punch a clock.
Yeah, and you and I think we've talked about this before, and I know that you've, I think, even done this in some instances, but if I'm a guy who's in the marketing business and I'm with a customer that maybe has a lot of potential but doesn't see it, I'll even take a risk and say, hey, you open your books to me, and we'll do a revenue share. You give me a piece of your business, a small piece of equity based on growth, and I'll do the marketing for you because I know I can launch you into the next hemisphere. And so
all day long. Well, and sometimes it's, because people don't want to bite off sometimes financially what it costs to do it right.
That's right.
And if there is enough.
That's the big one.
If there's enough potential in it, it's like, all right, look, put a little skin in the game, but we'll build it on equity because we know that we can get the ROI on it. So the equity play is when it comes into factor. So that definitely works. So where are you at now? You're with the same company. 10 years in, just having your 10-year anniversary.
Yep.
Content, happy with what you're doing. You're back on the sales side of things. What's next for the business?
So
what's your game plan? What are you doing next?
Yeah, so I am very happy at the company. They've been good to me. It's a good opportunity, and we continue to thrive. I was just telling you before we got on the air that we're seconds away from closing the largest deal in company history. It's going to be
congrats on that again. That's
a really nice services win down in Florida. We would have the contract by now, but the hurricanes are kind of getting in the way of that.
I heard.
God bless. Prayers out to those guys. Yeah. We know a little bit about that here in Houston. But so things have been really good. So I'm not necessarily in a hurry to leave, but I am itching for an entrepreneurial opportunity again. And so what I'm doing in the meantime is I continue to grow my network, and it's a different level of networking, right? When I was a younger guy, I was networking with commercial real estate agents and guys that sell marketing services and sell accounting services and legal services, and we would all trade referrals. And I even created my own group, and I had a website for it. We used to we'd come to your clubs and throw parties.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. No, they were great, man. I still listen. People loved it. I didn't even get much value out of it. They got more value out of it.
Absolutely,
they weren't given as many leads as I was given, but we were having fun.
Yeah, they didn't have Uber back then.
But the point is that we now the networking over the last couple of years has really
It's changed
gone to
dimensions.
the next level. And I'll tell you where it came into play. So when we were approached about selling Texas, there were actually two groups. So All Covered came to the table and their representatives, Tobias. And if you remember Drayton McLean that used to own the Astros, he owned a company within his portfolio of companies that was an IT services company out of Temple, Texas. And they were looking for a really good IT services company to buy that had a strong management team. And so they were looking at us too, but when the market turned down, a lot of his assets were tied up in oil and gas, and so he backed away. I went to the other two partners. I said, hey, guys, let me make a run at this. I'll buy you guys out, and I'm going to keep running the business. And so I did, and I didn't know anything about capital raising. I didn't know anything about investments, raising money. I didn't have, but I had contacts from networking. So I just started putting out calls, and I promise you not, it wasn't probably 2 or 3 hours. I had 3 or 4 people calling me back. Hey, I got this PE guy that wants to talk to you. I got this banker that wants to talk to you. It's a hot industry, right? These are recurring revenue models. We're like an annuity that will just pay out over the years. So long story short, I got plugged into an investment firm out of Dallas. They were going to give me some money. Obviously, I wanted to buy as much as I could with bank debt, right? Because once I paid it off, then I own all that equity. So I got a couple $1 million in bank debt, $2 million from these investors, and then I was going to have my partners seller finance a piece of it. In other words, I was going to leave them some roll forward equity, a small amount. They would sit home on their couches and still maintain a small ownership in the business. And I put together an offer, and it was a great offer. I was proud of it. The only thing was, and if you know anything about our industry now, is that the valuations are out of control. We are getting such high valuations. Most businesses might get, small businesses might get 2 or 3x earnings. Larger businesses get.
Is that annual earnings?
Yeah, of your EBITDA, and so then you get businesses that might be in the 10 to 50 million space that might be generating, 8 to 15, 20 million in EBITDA. Those guys are getting 5, 6, 7 times earnings. And then really large companies, multi-billion-dollar conglomerates, they might get, double-digit valuations, but very rarely. Well, companies in our space are getting, much smaller companies like us are getting those really big valuations, and we got a really, we got a big offer. I can't really disclose it, right? Because that's secret, but it was a very good offer. And at the end of the day, I wasn't willing to try and battle with a big conglomerate and try and take on too much debt. It wouldn't have made sense for me.
Yeah.
So instead, I happily,
sold.
I actually went to the partners. I said, this is an amazing offer. It's an amazing company. They can do great things for us. And we had hit that inflection point in the business, right? So rebranding and all the wonderful things we did shot us to the next level, but then we hit another inflection point.
Yeah, where you exhausted your efforts and you're kind of at a ceiling until something else happened.
Yeah, you need different tools, you need higher end skill sets and labor, you need all these things. And so we were going to have to bring in some investors anyway to grow to the next level, and All Covered solved that problem for us. So we exited, and it was great because we got most of our money up front. There weren't any, we all signed, actually at the time we signed 1-year contracts. Sometimes they want these owners to stay in the business for 3-4 years.
And this is the same company you're a part of now.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they're already operationally mature. They have great resources in place. They knew they didn't necessarily need the leadership.
So what's next for you? Yeah.
So all that being said, I've now have relationships with a lot of these private equity guys. I've also sat on CRN, which is a top industry publication for the IT industry. They put on the events. I've been on their board now for about 5 or 6 years. So it's given me an opportunity to grow into a thought leader in the industry nationally. I know these companies all across the country, and I've advised and helped a lot of them out.
So do you think you're going to make another play at it?
I think I will someday. I think when God opens up that opportunity, when the right company kind of falls in my lap, I've already got the infrastructure built, right? I've got the investors, I've got friends and family money. My whole deal is, again, I'm not in much of a different, I've built a nice wealth, a nice nest egg. I'm not rich or anything, but I've done well for myself and my family up until this point. So, I don't want to eat into that. We have a daughter going to college next year. So rather than, again, start a business and maybe not earn for a year or two, I'm going to look at eventually buying or even partnering with a few other friends in the industry to buy into another
where you're
business.
not starting from fresh.
Yeah, you'll find a business owner who was like our guys were, 8 years ago. They've hit their ceiling. They've outgrown their capabilities. We come in, buy them out, and then we take it to the next level, and then we sell out at some point.
I gotcha. Well, I think that's a perfect place to end it. I mean, and it's a great story, a great journey of how somebody comes in as a sales rep, they take over departments, they grow the company, they cap out on equity and percentages, they sell, they go through an actual acquisition, cash out, and then they're still brought back on in a GM type position to run the company and still make salary with all the benefits. I mean, that's the fucking golden story, bro.
That's the goose that laid the golden egg.
It is, man.
It's not without hard work, though.
Absolutely.
And I'll say one other thing, grit. You talked about grit. Our CEO today talks a lot about grit. There's a great book out there by Angela Duckworth called Grit. And it's one of many, I like to read books. I like to listen to books more now, but that's a good one. So your viewers might check it out. It'd be a good read.
I appreciate you coming on the show. Holly, appreciate you hanging out with us. We're going to look forward to seeing you next week. Appreciate y'all tuning in today. This is Jason Wright. I'll leave his contact information. If you're in the IT world looking for one of the top leading guys in the IT world, you'll be able to get a hold of him. Appreciate y'all tuning in. This is The Grit, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you very much.